The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has presented the possibility of listing the greater sage grouse as an endangered species. It's become the focus of intense research and collaboration by a number of organizations to understand how best to protect the bird and its habitat. Catching and tagging sage grouse with high-tech monitoring equipment is an essential part of gathering that data. The key factor in whether the bird is listed is whether the vast sagebrush ecosystem it requires can be maintained and restored as viable habitat. Currently, the sage grouse ranges over 50 million acres of both public and private western rangeland that it shares with agriculture, mining, renewable energy projects, and rural communities. This presents a dilemma. If the sage grouse is officially listed as an endangered species, it could severely cripple the economic engines of the American West. So just what is a sage grouse?
Sage grouse are a gallinaceous bird, and they're the largest North American grouse species. Females weigh up to about 2.5 to 3 pounds, and males can be actually twice their size. Some males weigh up to 6 pounds. Most of their life cycle revolves around the sagebrush ecosystem, and for most of the year, they're reliant upon sagebrush as a forage species.
Originally, sage grouse were thought to range across sagebrush habitat in over 13 states in Canada, and that's over 450,000 square miles. Biologists estimate that the bird currently occupies a range limited to about 56% of pre-European settlement numbers. They estimate that there are still between 300 and 500,000 sage grouse in the West. But 8 of the 11 western states with populations have shown an estimated decline of 2% per year since 1965.
The threats that sagebrush ecosystems face are daunting. Nevada, for example, one of the greatest threats to sagebrush ecosystems is the fire and invasive species cycle. And in bad fire years, we can lose hundreds of thousands of acres of sagebrush habitat in the blink of an eye. Most recently, in 2010, we determined that they do deserve protection. However, there are other higher priority listing actions for other species around the nation, and so we wouldn't get to a final determination to proposing to list them until September of 2015.
Under this ticking clock, a variety of groups comprised of government agencies, private business, and individuals are working to improve their habitat. The plan is not only to save the bird, but to avoid the restrictions that come with the listing, impacting activities from mining to recreation.
It would be devastating. The biggest fear that I have is that some of the decisions that would come out of a listing would be politically motivated rather than scientifically studied.
Much of the West has the potential to become the home for renewable energy projects. Though, even before the listing of the sage grouse, some development is already being affected, and many are concerned that this will compromise future plans. Recently, the China Mountain Wind Project in Elko County, Nevada, was canceled.
It meant about $1.8 million in tax revenue to Elko County every year, and now that isn't going to happen.
Many question how a bird can be endangered when it's documented that over 1/2 million still roam the West.
First, they want us to believe that the grouse is so rare that it warrants listing under the Endangered Species Act. Then they want us to believe that it's so prevalent that if it's listed, it's going to affect over 54 million acres of habitat across 11 states. So they basically concluded that a minimum effective population of 5,000 birds would provide enough genetic material to safeguard it from the risk of long-term extinction, but then turn around and say an existing population that exceeds 500,000 birds somehow warrants listing as either endangered or threatened under the Endangered Species Act.
The Fish and Wildlife Service have expressed concern that many greater sage grouse populations have already fallen well below a population of 5,000 birds, potentially compromising their genetic diversity.
People tend to fixate on the population number, but that's not how the law is necessarily written. The definition under the Act is a species threatened or endangered within all or a significant portion of its range in the foreseeable future. If sage grouse are below viability in 38 of the 41 populations, is that a significant portion?
Some of the most progressive research underway is being conducted by Dr. Peter Coates of the U.S. Geological Survey, which does impartial research for federal and state land and wildlife management agencies.
We use a variety of tools to collect information on this bird. This is a solar panel right here. That allows it, so the battery that's in there is recharged, and you have a GPS device here, which actually records, takes fixes from the satellites, multiple satellites overhead, and then it stores that information. So it rides actually on the rump of the bird rather than on its back. So we call it a fanny pack.
That's what I say. It's not a backpack, it's a fanny pack.
It's not a backpack, It's a fanny pack, The main questions that we're answering with this is where these grouse go.
One area of major study is the effect predators have on sage grouse.
What the major goal here is to try to understand predation. As far as identifying predators, we used micro cameras and DVRs. These cameras have continuous videography. They see day and night, infrared vision, very effective at capturing the predator community. Badgers were always successful at removing the female from the nest and consuming eggs. This is a raven, everyone's favorite bird. We video recorded many raven-caused predations, most of which the female was attending the nest and the raven attacked her. Just to show the point that these guys, very persistent, but they just can't get into those eggs. We actually had ground squirrels running into the sides of females on the nest, and they didn't budge. Most frequent are ravens, and then we have badgers, coyotes.
Raven populations have increased on average over 600% in the Great Basin as they use power lines to seek out their prey. Human recreation activities and roadkill have also increased their food supply.
It was about in the 1960s, when the environmental movement really started getting its traction, that those predator control programs were scaled dramatically back. And I don't think it's any coincidence that it was at that same time period that sage grouse populations began declining.
As far as I know, the only thing that they are able to do now is Nevada, through the Nevada Department of Wildlife, has a permit to kill 2,000 ravens per year. And 2,000 ravens is just a drop in the bucket.
We work with wildlife services to control ravens at this time of the year when they're focused on looking for sage grouse nests and taking eggs from sage grouse nests.
While predators are significant threats to the wildlife of the sagebrush landscape, nothing has proven more devastating than wildfire. In Nevada alone, over 4 million acres of public land have been devoured by fire since 2001.
In the western half of the range of sage grouse, so not just Nevada, but western Utah, Idaho, and Oregon, we think that fire and invasive species, and specifically cheatgrass, is the single biggest threat to sage grouse and sagebrush ecosystems. And there seems to be broad agreement between us, other federal agencies, the states, and many people in rural communities that fire and cheatgrass is a major threat, the major threat.
The average 10-year average burn on this 300,000 acre ranch, burns have been increasing since '85 in their size and frequency. But we have got to start shrinking that down so that the fires get smaller, and if they're smaller, they're likely not to return to the same spot. We can handle some fire out here, and it's good for diversity. We have huge fires, and it's bad. It's a monoculture.
That monoculture is often the invasion of cheatgrass, an invasive species that is often the first to return after a fire. This is pretty typical terrain for a range fire that's been fueled by cheatgrass. As you can see, the area has been completely devastated.
And what happens is then cheatgrass invades those burn sites. Cheatgrass burns so frequently that sagebrush can't become reestablished, and we have a spread of annual grasslands and a continuing significant loss of sagebrush habitat.
Once you convert a landscape from sagebrush to cheatgrass, it's virtually useless to sage grouse. Once they've lost that habitat and they've become so hardwired into going back to the same places year after year, and once that habitat is gone, sometimes what we'll see is we'll see males still return to that lek. We'll see females that return, but they'll nest in an area that has been burned, and they'll largely be unsuccessful.
A method of restoring land after fire is reseeding, often using a diversity of seed to bring back sagebrush and various native grasses.
This year in 2012, we've actually had some of our collared hens come back out in here and start nesting in this area that, prior to this year was pretty much useless for the sage grouse.
Seeding projects can be more challenging on areas that have burned twice within a short time.
Sagebrush fires historically were every 75 to 150 years. We're now in a burn cycle that's repeating. Right where we're standing here, you'll see a strip that they've aerially seeded sagebrush, and you can see that the sagebrush did come in this strip. But outside that strip, there's hardly any recruitment, any natural recruitment. So it shows you that if we burn in certain areas too frequently, I'm not sure when or if this land will ever come back and be meaningful to sage grouse.
While Greg uses grazing cattle as a means to reduce fire, some contend cattle are the problem, not the solution.
It doesn't matter how heavily grazed a landscape is, it's going to burn anyway. And if you heavily graze it, you are destroying habitat for all kinds of other species.
Greg counters that without grazing, too much forage builds up and creates more fire fuel.
Fire size is highly correlated to fuel volume. Fuel volume drives flame length. Flame lengths drive rate of spread, and rate of spread is going to be what the eventual fire size is.
Because it was not grazed last year, there's an abundance of fuel. There's an abundance of plant material there that would burn very, very well and very hot.
The pastures that are grazed in the spring aren't going to have the fuel available for a fire. And so, if you remove all the animals, the whole thing is a tinderbox.
The service agrees that livestock grazing can be an important tool in areas with cheatgrass to help reduce fuel loads and the risk of catastrophic fire that can then spread into sagebrush habitats and harming sage grouse further.
The potential listing restrictions could eliminate or strictly curtail grazing, a strange contradiction to ranchers that often see sage grouse coexisting with cattle and benefiting from the irrigated and grazed meadows.
Yeah, they'll come in and they'll go, and it seems like they'll roost kind of out in the sagebrush steppe in the daytime, and then they'll come down in the meadows early in the mornings and late in the evenings. But I think we're going to find that as we improve our habitat for sage grouse, we're going to improve it for mule deer. We're going to improve it for our small birds, mammals, and for me, we're going to improve it for cows.
Restoring and conserving sagebrush ecosystems is going to take a lot longer than 3 years. And our goal is to say whether this bird ends up listed under the Endangered Species Act or not should become less of an issue if we all agree on what the threats are and what the solutions are and work together to address those.
this is a double-edged sword. I think that the issue of listing has brought industry and a lot of us around to the needs. I think that we're going in the right direction. I think at this point in time, a listing would be detrimental to the bird.